That's Neal. When we're not building mini demo decks, we're running approve. You guys know it. Woo, woo. Oh, there's one. Yeah. We had a 3-minute transaction on KidBlog yesterday. 2 new users. It was our new record. Pretty awesome. It's our new record. We're going to beat it next week. So Neal and I decided to do this pitch just because I've always been fascinated with this kind of stuff. And we had a really busy week. So you'll have to forgive us if it's a little disjointed and we're reading off our notes and quotes and some of that kind of stuff. This is a quote from Thomas Frey. And by the way, just to set the stage, we have a couple videos. There might be some glitches on here. We have no idea if the audio works. So we're just going to roll with it, so bear with us. Yeah, I can just hold this down there.
There you go.
There we go. We're good. So Thomas Frey said this, our greatest motivations in life come from not knowing the future. He's a famous futurist, and he had a number of other quotes that I just thought it would be fun to share. Every avalanche begins with the movement of a single snowflake. Much like walking through a dark forest with a flashlight, the future only comes into focus a short distance in front of us. So how do we create a brighter flashlight? Beware of complexity disguised as a solution. All information ever created is still in existence. This is a good one. Half of everything you learn in college is a complete waste of time, but you'll never know which half. We are being judged by the future. Next slide. So Churchill in 1932 predicted that in 50 years an engine would generate 600 horsepower for hours from a fuel tank the size of a fountain pen. Iceland would be relocated to the tropics, robots would have human-like consciousness, and people would feast on synthetic chicken flesh grown in laboratories. So he's not that far off, to be honest. And I actually worked with a guy probably 10 years ago that was already growing the synthetic chicken breasts in a lab in New York. And I've seen a number of people go that way. So anyway, smart guy, interesting predictions. I really got interested to this. My father, a story from my dad that I always remember, he remembers in the late 50s, he read somewhere that 3 things would happen in the future. This is in the late 50s. We'd drink our water from bottles, we'd pay to exercise, and we would eat out more than we'd eat in. And he remembers thinking, that is just silly. All of those things are just silly. You know, like why would you pay to stand in a park and have someone do this? Who would ever drink their water out of bottles? I mean, it just didn't even cross their mind. Next. So I'm gonna start with just some big, broad trends and look at some of the technology that's going on that may or may not predict or help them. And Neal's gonna get a little more micro into some more techie kind of stuff that's going on. Global population expected to stabilize at about 10 billion in 2050. About 70% of the world's population will live in cities by 2050.
Which I think started well below 50% less than 150 years ago. So, I mean, there's a huge migration into the cities.
Yeah. Human overpopulation, significant pressure on food, energy, and water resources. Some of the predictions around competition for these resources generating a lot of strife around the world. Expect increases in malaria, diarrhea, cholera, TB, Hep, HIV, influenza, blah, blah, blah. It's a pretty picture out there. Pandemics, those kinds of predictions are pretty common when you start digging into the ramifications of what is happening. When you look at where it's happening, it's probably not a surprise. The per capita birth rate in the US has gone under 2 for the first time in I don't know, the last 100 years or so. The per capita birth rate in Nigeria is over 5. It's like 5.3 or something like that. Pretty amazing.
I think we've not quite gotten to just the point of replacement in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. And what's interesting is if you look at the ratios of these graphs, you see the explosive growth in Asia and Africa that's coming up in the near future, but then after that it kind of levels off. And it'll be kind of interesting to see how that applies when we get to the technology section.
You're seeing stuff like France and Italy relax their immigration rules because their population is declining in like a huge way, as is their workforce, their tax base, all of that stuff that's important to government. Again, not completely surprising that those two parallel from monetary and food and access to resources, and this obviously parallels with education and some other stuff. Next slide.
Another thing before we go to the next slide that's interesting to think about is what we define as rich countries and poor countries has changed a lot in the last several hundred years. So if we're going to project this out to 2250, the reality is that what we call rich and poor countries is probably going to shift, but you get the idea of the graph anyway. Yep, that's the same population graph that we saw on the last screen.
Yep. So one of my favorite books in high school was Brave New World. Anyone read it back in the day? Right? Pretty awesome, pretty freaky. I was a big comic book guy, and this like took my interest in science fiction and that kind of stuff a step further. So when you go back to those population growths, what are we going to do from a technology perspective in terms of solving a lot of these problems? Aldous Huxley's vision, if you haven't read the book, birth control is essentially in the water. It's essentially every person here is born sterile to a certain degree, and people are manufactured in test tubes. And they're manufactured in an alpha to gamma standpoint based upon how much oxygen you are given in the test tube. Alphas become doctors and attorneys and lawyers, and gammas are street sweepers. Pretty interesting picture of the future.
Talk about how they mature at different rates.
Yes, yeah, I remember that. It's been a while since I've read it.
So the gammas mature in like 2 years. They're just like a horse. They're full adult.
Yep.
So,
Great book, worth reading if you don't want to read all the how to run a startup books. You can read something a little more creative. So one of my pet interests that parallel with this is water. Obviously here you see surface water going up. You're already seeing displacements in places like Alaska of communities, of people. My prediction for the future is this is going to expand into the continental U.S. in the next 30 years.
A lot of people talk about how we're trying to find new energy and all those sorts of things, and there's new ways to harvest energy that we don't know yet and we're still trying to discover. The reality is there is no more water than what we have on the planet. We can't harvest it from the sun. We can't figure out nuclear power, those sorts of things. When we run out of water, I mean, we have a very finite amount of water on the planet, and we don't know any way of making more yet.
when you say water, you meant fresh water.
Fresh water.
Correct.
Correct.
Well, but I mean, we may find ways of desalinating seawater, but nonetheless, there is still a finite amount of water.
We'll show you an example of a little technology that's being used to harvest some water in a unique way. Water scarcity, again, no surprise that this is covered in the poorer areas, the warmer areas as well. Always bothers me when I go to Vegas and that stupid Bellagio fountain goes off, which we've all seen it. It's actually pretty cool, but the evaporation from that pool alone in the middle of the summer, and every other pool in Vegas, and the fact that they're pulling that water from Lake Mead, from California, from the Colorado River, it's almost criminal in my book. My prediction, one of mine for the future, the next big pipeline will not be next big pipeline battle won't be a Keystone battle. It'll be a freshwater battle based around the Great Lakes.
Probably won't be battling about, it's going to drip into
Right.
Yeah, they want the pipeline, not keep it out of my backyard. Yeah.
Yep. LA right now, this is from the New York Times, February 2014. That would be a month and a half ago. With no sign of rain, 17 rural communities providing water to 40,000 people are in danger of running out within 60 to 120 days. State officials said the number was likely to rise in the months ahead after the State Water Project, the main municipal water distribution system, announced on Friday that it did not have enough water to supplement the dwindling supplies of local agencies that provide water to an additional 25 million people. It's the first time the project has turned off its spigot in its 54-year history. Pretty crazy. And yes, it does happen here as well. We're seeing stuff related to, obviously, temperature, global warming, impacting rainfall. That's a little scary. Again, these are, I think when I was building this, I was reminded of how white people problems are, something that we're dealing with a lot, and the rest of the world is thinking just so differently. We're here at this fancy tech conference, and
Oh my God, the Wi-Fi doesn't work.
yeah, right. Go ahead. Scary. Everyone thinks of the drought side, but the flooding side is pretty much just as much of a reality. Go ahead. So we're going to show you a little video. If you want to go up to the video tab in the right corner. Play this one. We'll see if there's video. This is, or audio. Doesn't sound like it.
Oops, wrong button.
Oh,
It's right in the keyboard.
so this is called a...
Whoa, you can't walk away. I'll do it. Use mine.
It's called FogQuest. It's a very simple device that, I don't know if you missed it before, this thing will collect 500 liters of water a day. And this is actually in Nepal. Water condensers are another piece of technology that they look like windmills, giant windmills, pulling atmospheric water out of the air, condensing it. But this, I just loved it because it was so low tech.
र आउने मान्छेलाई थोपा थोपा गरेर हातसम्म धुने चाहिँ दिन्थ्यो अहिले भनेको पर्याप्त पानी छ तपाईको आउनेले खाना ओर्न पनि पाउँछन्
Pretty cool, right? Simple. Yeah. Yep. No, agree. Next slide. Any global warming skeptics in here? It's okay, raise your hand. I mean, if that's actually true, then we've made a little progress, so that's good. Go ahead. So we'll move a little bit in this direction. Another pet peeve of mine is the fact that up until 2 weeks ago, I drove a Prius, which is a very green vehicle, right? I'm really green. I run a tech company. I'm like driving my Prius. We run on Heroku, right? Mm-hmm. We use Amazon Web Services. We have all kinds of these machines going on, as a lot of our companies do, and we never see them. We don't touch them. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Servers themselves account for about less than a third of the total data center energy consumption. You want the next slide? Cooling systems, the massive air conditioning machines that keep hard drive servers and other network gears from overheating are the main cause of the energy. The EPA estimated that data centers consume about 2% of the total electricity in the United States a year. That's about 1 gigaton, 1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. It's a significant rise from less than 5 years ago when it was only 1.5%. So pretty significant jump in just 5 years, and all of us in the data-driven economy are contributing to this problem. Well, you're seeing that. You're seeing Facebook and Google set up shop in Finland and Iceland and places like that. So yeah, you do gain some efficiencies by essentially running fans of cold water from a bottom-up, structure. If you've ever been in a data center, it's pretty wild.
There's even a Minnesota company making strides in this area. Liquid Cool Systems is building new ways of cooling servers that don't require you to cool the whole data center, that instead pipe the coolant through tubes that cool the elements on the server racks that are necessary, instead of having this whole hot aisle, cold aisle thing. And that's a Minnesota company doing that work.
I think another thing we're all guilty of in terms of contributing to this problem, a McKinsey study found that the average server use is less than 15% of its peak, with about 60% of servers sitting idle at any given time, all continuing to draw huge amounts of energy in anticipation of the unexpected surge in use. This mentality of underutilization is the norm in the risk-averse IT industry. In comparison, even cell phones and other portable devices consume less in a standby mode, less than 1/10 of their peak power use. So we are guilty of that, right? We want double backup and backup here, and when a hurricane comes, and all that kind of stuff, but there is a lot of energy waste that's going on.
So it'll be interesting to see as the move to cloud, and shared infrastructure should help level that demand curve out a whole lot. But on the flip side, as we're going to see here a little bit too, the demand itself is going to go up a whole lot. So, we'll be more efficient, but we'll also be utilizing more.
Carbon capture and storage is one of the technologies that is being hailed as something that we could do. And I mean, think of it as, we capture nuclear waste and we put it in a box and we shove it under the ground somewhere. It seems a little archaic, and they thought about doing it in the ocean, of course, until they realized that they would basically acidify the ocean. It'll be tested at its full commercial scale basically just this year. Up in Canada, looks like, is the first test. I'm not sure. CCS, the process of capturing carbon dioxide from large point sources such as fossil fuel plants, transporting it to a storage site and depositing it where it will never enter the atmosphere, normally an underground geological formation. There's got to be a better way.
Sometimes if you're going to Google this sort of thing, you'll see it under sequestering, carbon sequestering.
I just thought we'd touch on this just a little bit. Some of the trends by 2030 in healthcare, regenerative medicine, growing parts. You're seeing that already happen. Human augmentation, the advancements in prosthetics, hands, legs, complete exoskeletons for people who are in wheelchairs. That stuff is happening. Next slide. Brain-machine interfaces. You're seeing this quite often with some of the VR stuff that's kind of teetering on the edge of this, but it's definitely happening and definitely making strides. This is one that lots of people talk about. We have our friends at Zipnosis here. Shout out. Whoop. There you go. That's your data. Yep. So those guys are leading the way. Good. Technology. So we're going to get into that part here. I think I have one more. Oh, 3D printing, everyone talks about it. I've always thought it was kind of a joke, but The predictions around 3D printing: a functioning human organ will be printed in the next 30 years. A 3D printed gun will be used in a major crime. Makes sense. If our gun laws continue to change, that is the direction people could go. And this one, Neal and I actually saw the founder of MakerBot speak at a conference we were at. And his goal is to have a 3D printer in every school in America. So he laments the fact that industrial ed is dead. No one's building birdhouses anymore. And this is essentially the replacement for that.
We also saw another startup when we were out in San Francisco last week called Authentize, which I thought was really interesting, and it sort of loops everything in here as well. This gentleman is actually a member of the Singularity University, SU, and he's a company that's being incubated by them. And what he is producing is, you can kind of think about it as the iTunes of 3D printing. So when you think about where 3D printing is going to go, the idea is that it's a lot easier to manufacture something on premise rather than to ship it, right? So now we start getting into the idea of licensing content. Rather than having your engineers and, as being an engineer and having to produce a widget and then not only just design it, but then also figure out how to get it manufactured, where does it get manufactured, how is it distributed, et cetera. All of that vaporizes, and all you have to do as an engineer to bring a product to market is publish the drawings. And then a company like Authentize basically creates this almost iTunes licensing store where you own a 3D printer, and in a lot of cases where this will start is it'll be contract manufacturing companies. Like we have Protolabs here in town is one of the leaders in the space. So Protolabs is already helping manufacturers build prototypes and small run manufacturing in a really, really rapid manner. But what you'll start to see now is companies like Protolabs will move even more into a rapid production part delivery system, because the economies of scale that you normally get that are normally really expensive in terms of tooling are going to basically be washed away, so that it's almost as easy to build 1 or 100 of something as it is to build thousands. And that's just going to completely change the economics of how we build something in China, have it shipped over here, and then figure out how to distribute it. And so the whole global distribution of goods will change. And getting back to Michael's talk about 3D printing and guns, one of the things that the founder of Authentize thought was really interesting is that everybody's afraid that I can go home and I can 3D print a gun. But when you start to look at forensics and stenography and all those sorts of things, there's all sorts of interesting promise that actually help us solve crimes with 3D printed guns, because we'll be able to trace them in some cases more easily than a traditionally manufactured gun. And in fact, if you start using intellectual property, he doesn't like the term DRM, and he doesn't cast it as DRM, but there's some elements of what you might have been familiar with in the music industry. But the idea being that your printer will actually put serial numbers embed them in the object in ways that can't be filed off, because it's actually inside the metal or the plastic or whatever, in a place where a lot of people aren't going to even know to look. So I think there's some really interesting things going there.
Go ahead, you can take the middle.
Cool.
You're up.
So typical mobile users today check their phones 150 times per day. I think that's kind of, at least in my case, probably low. But what we're going to see here on the next couple of screens, if you want to go to the next one.
Sorry, I threw this one in there too.
This one's, yeah. So 90% of all internet traffic in 2017 will be video. And what's really cool is you see the impact of that on some of these next graphs that we have.
But it also goes backwards to the impact on server use and
Right.
all that other stuff.
Oh, because
Sorry,
we're
I
not to
gotta
the
come
graphs
more.
yet. There we go.
There we go.
That's the one I was looking for. So this starts out, I think we got this zoomed in too far. What's
I know, I couldn't do it.
the base of the graph, I think? Yeah, this is 2013 to 2018. And people are already pretty staggered that we're moving around, 1.5 exabytes of data today. But that's going to move to, I think that's 15.9 in the future, and a lot of that is video. And the other component, so from the human utilization perspective, it's primarily video. From a good chunk of the rest of that utilization is actually what we're calling today the Internet of Things. And the notion that everything from somebody seems to think it would be useful to connect my toaster to the Wi-Fi network. I don't know why, but what it's really going to be is probably industrial machinery data from your security systems, from your mines, from, we've got smart things here in town building stuff like that, and Spark, another local startup that is seeing huge adoption. We're going to start seeing connected devices become larger and larger percentages of the overall traffic on the internet. And that's what's really going to drive a lot of the innovation in our server infrastructure as well as our wireless infrastructure. And then a big piece of it as well is, of course, the coming of age, so to speak, of what we called the poor countries on that earlier slide start to become connected. And we're actually starting to see now, I believe, is it this year or next year, is we're going to see actually the first case in, I believe, and my rote memory is really bad, but I believe it's Western Africa will be the first place where it is easier to get a cell phone signal than it is to get electricity. And so we're actually able to deploy connectivity faster than we can deploy power.
Is that the Google lumps?
No, this is actually live on the ground, real people. There will be more people with cell phones than people with power in their houses. Crazy. So, and they're trying to solve some of these, how do I charge my phone if I don't have power at home? And they have, people are going to coffee shops. They're having charging stations in their villages and things like that. But connectivity is outpacing electrification in poor areas.
I mean, Opera that they're using?
Opera?
Yeah. Is that the provider?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, they have 99%.
Okay. Yeah, that may
I
be.
believe they're owned by Verizon as well, right?
That may be. And then we kind of go into talking about media and the conversion to digital. And so the first one here is talking about, what's going to happen to dead tree media. You can see that U.S. online ad spending is now finally starting to outpace all of the various print advertising mechanisms. So if you add up at the end of this chart on the right-hand side, if you add up the newspapers, the magazines, the total print, it's all, basically in decline at this point as internet spending goes up. And the next slide, I believe, is television. What's happening here is a couple of things. Obviously, the benefits of moving media online are really, really huge. But what it's also doing is it's democratizing the ability to publish information. And so when you think about it, what is a TV network? Why do we call it a network? Well, because this is the only way, a TV network, CBS, NBC, et cetera, the only way that they were able to generate these huge amounts of ad revenue is that they had basically the only vehicle that an advertiser could take to a market. And there were only 3 major television networks, historically speaking. And that shift now to first cable networks, then now moving online, is democratizing the ability to publish. And so now the TV networks are losing their captive audience. They're not able to monetize that as much, and they're losing the focus. And so I was just listening to NPR 2 days ago, and I was driving at the time, so I couldn't write down the guy's name, but he was predicting that there would be no more large media networks in terms of the TV. The NBC would basically be non-existent by 2020.
You guys know Arrow company? Pretty awesome, huh? I mean, if they can pull that off, they're in the middle of a lawsuit. It's basically an antenna about this big that's going to pull the free signal that we all get for the 4 networks and put it online. And the networks are going just crazy about it and suing the pants off them, and it's now in the Supreme Court.
But this person I was listening to the other day was really, he was very bullish that there would be a very steep inflection point here in the very near future that would basically just drive the networks out of business very quickly, simply because they're going to get to that point where the ad revenues simply can't sustain their operations anymore, and people will just, as the networks, as the data networks come up to speed, your broadband providers, your 4G and LTE cell phones, et cetera, it will basically vaporize that entire industry incredibly quickly.
We got like a couple minutes now.
Yep.
I want to show that video too.
Cool. So the last kind of thing, if you really want to have your mind blown, go read up on this guy. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of people in this room have probably already heard of Ray Kurzweil, right? A lot of people think he's really kooky, and he is, even if you agree with him. I mean, this guy takes 250 supplements a day and like 100-some different intravenous infusions into his bloodstream to try and extend his own life to what he calls the singularity, which is the point where computer intelligence will exceed human intelligence on the planet. And at that point, he calls it the singularity because we cannot predict the future after that. But what's interesting about it is that he is basically predicted the Internet of Things, if you will. He's had a number of incredibly successful predictions. Let's see here. One of the more interesting things, where did my notes go? Sorry, I got behind on my notes. According to his own analysis, he has predicted successfully 89 out of the last 108 predictions that he made towards the end of 2009. An additional 13 he still calls essentially correct. And then another 3 were partially correct, and 2 more look like they're about 10 years off, so not really correct. So that leaves 1 where he wasn't correct, and he claims that was a joke anyway. So he's now 66 years old. Let's see, he claims that by 2020 there will be a new world government. We'll have our first form of a world government, and you can kind of see where the EU is going. He claims that a computer will pass the Turing test, which is kind of widely accepted as the measure, the yardstick of whether or not you are a sentient being or human, that a computer will actually be able to pass that. The one that I find really interesting is that the average lifespan will hit a point where it accelerates at a rate more than 1 year per year. Think about what that means. If I'm 55 right now, let's see, if I'm 68 right now and the average lifespan is 69, next year I'll be 69, but the average lifespan will be 70. And the year after that, I'll be 70, but now it's going to be more than 71, and it'll start accelerating. What he's getting at is a form of effective immortality. And there's a couple of different angles as to why that comes about. One of them is obviously healthcare and curing things like cancer. Another one is actually related to energy. And of course, there's also the computer side of it and being able to effectively upload your brain and things like that. And nanobots, yep, being able to inject yourself with little robots that'll repair your tissues as you go. But one of the things that he gets towards is the ability to basically move your conscious into the cloud and then present yourself in various forms in the real world as needed. So whether that's temporarily being, rather than flying to Japan, I'm just going to actually rent a body out there. And what's really cool is there's all sorts of, you start looking at movies like The Matrix. One of my favorites, if you haven't, if you're into anime at all, you probably already know Ghost in the Shell. But even if you're not into anime, that has been kind of one of the more amazing series. There's a couple of movies which are kind of traditional, very abstract sort of anime, and then there's a couple of TV series that called The Standalone Complex, which takes some of these ideas and apply them in a way that's both really cool if you're into the whole sci-fi thing, but also they get into the politics of what happens to things like society and politics and immigration and societal disconnects and so forth. And I think it's really neat. And of course, it's all told in the guise of a special forces paramilitary group with big guns and stuff like that. So it's kind of a fun one.
when you think of a world government, the first step will be the first world vote. That will be really cool. Whether it's sanctioned by anyone or not, our ability to cast a vote as a massive planet would be pretty awesome. We're going to show a little bit of this video. I just thought it was super fun.
Uh-oh. First world problems.
Excellent. Perfect. Good job. Excellent. Well done. Level complete.
Welcome.
Snail zombies from your backyard.
Nobody's just staring at a wall.
And in this journey, we all want to do more, experience more, feel more, and live with no boundaries. And why shouldn't we? Sight System presents Sightseeing. Feel free to go anywhere. Reminder, date at 9 p.m. Choose outfit.
Patrick?
Oh. Hi. Hi, Daphne. How are you? Sorry.
It's okay.
You look great.
All right, there's more to it, but gamification, obviously, we didn't talk about, but it's in there. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks.